it's always good to put it in context. That's basically what it is. So just quickly go through my qualifications. I have a science degree. I do have a specialist practitioner status in obesity and diabetes and obesity, and also do blood works, qualified phlebotomist, those sort of things. But I am not a doctor, absolutely not a doctor. So, right, here we go. So I have a lot of people ask me questions, and they're really great, and I appreciate them, and they say things like, what is the best exercise for me? Is dairy good for me? Is my blood glucose too high? Those sort of things. And what is the best source of protein? So somebody gave me a question today, Amy, it was really good, showed a lot of context. Hope you include type 1 diabetes. I've been type 1 for 50 years, carnivore for 3 years, how old she is, what a good combo she's got of healthiness, and the units of insulin she's taking. And the good thing about what I think is a really good thing about the Mighty Networks is that people also put in really interesting, fantastic, supportive comments as well for people to see. So I thought that was quite good. Okay, so that was Kate. So thank you, Kate, for that. So here's one of the questions, just to talk about context. Someone said to me, what is an ideal A1C for type 2 diabetics? And the answer to that is 5.2, on average, 5.2. So the top question there, that's really good. It's very simple. And we can answer that. We can really answer that. But for some people, it might be different, you see, depending on their age and their history. But that's an easy one to answer. Then there was one that said, which is better, a lighter weight with many reps or heavier weights with less reps? Now, that's not got enough context to give you an answer online because I have no goal. I don't know what your goal is, if it's strength, if it's to lose weight, if it's to be able to run really fast. So I don't know what the goal is from that. So I'm going to get into how we set the context a bit better. And just to give you a bit more of a global thing, because we do the bloods and we talk about so many things in the meetings, somebody said, is my progesterone too high? Well, the context of that is really a thing that can help everyone understand how the body is so complex, because it depends. If you look at a 28-day cycle of someone ovulating, the question, is my progesterone too high? We need to know what day you had your blood draw. So that's why I sometimes ask lots of additional questions, because we can't answer that. And if you're looking at hormones, if you take that particular person, their hormones over a 28-day period, this is just 3 hormones. And you can see that the follicular stimulating hormone goes up slightly, then it goes down. The luteinizing hormone, the gonadotrophin releasing hormone goes up, and then it goes down. They all work together. And strangely, this little bump here, the follicular stimulating hormone, goes up in relation to estrogen going up. But then estrogen in the background goes up even more. And it's actually, once it gets past a certain level, that the FSH starts to go down. So estrogen going up and up and up, there is a tipping point where it has a different feedback, see? So that's, if anyone wants to talk about, bless you, cycles and stuff like that, we can do that. And this complex relationship has been known since 1934. So about 100 years, that all the glands, all the stimulating and inhibiting goes backwards and forwards. So we need to really find out more about just one particular reading. So when someone says, is my blood glucose okay? I need context for that. So if you're measuring your blood glucose, we're looking at somebody back in 1974 over here. The blood glucose can be going along in this band that's perfectly fine for a little while. But in the background, the insulin is going up. This is taken from real data and used for illustrative purposes only. But as you can see, this person's blood glucose, they were measuring it for a long, long time, and it was looking pretty normal. But in the background, the insulin was going up and up and up. And that is an indication of the possibility of insulin resistance happening for that person. But if they'd asked me, in 1986, here's my blood glucose, it's 5.6, that's the UK reading. It's about 98, something like that in American money. Is my blood glucose okay? You would say yes, but actually you'd be wrong, because there's something in the background, meaning that the insulin's going up, and that again could be insulin resistance. So remember, blood glucose level is a marker. It's a symptom. It's not the disease. So if you have high blood glucose, that's not the disease. It's not all about lowering blood glucose. It's looking at why is it high, or like in a type 1 diabetic, for instance, there's going to be issues because they don't produce enough insulin. So they're going to have high blood sugars, and they have to inject insulin, and then they have to dose it in consequence of how many carbohydrates they're eating, basically. And I do get a lot of people ask me, what tests can you run when you become carnivore, or when you're doing when you're feeling that you might be diabetic, looking at, say, your waist circumference is inflating, and it's your height to waist ratio is not as good as you like. What tests can you run? And there's so many. One of the tests that they do in a clinic is an oral glucose tolerance test. They can also do it intravenously. And that's where you have a big drink, basically, of glucose, and you swallow that, 75 grams of glucose, and then they will measure your bloods sort of at half-hour intervals for 2 hours, and they'll just look at what's happening with your blood glucose levels. Now, you can pass that test. You can biohack that. If you're not having lots and lots of glucose because you're on a carnivore diet and you went in and did that test, you would fail that test. But if the night before you drank 50 grams of glucose, then you're going to wake your pancreas back up and produce a bit more insulin and probably do better in the test. I'm not saying for you to do that, but it just shows that a test like that, which is really quite good and quite nuanced, can be biohacked with the addition of eating carbohydrates. Sometimes you have to do it for 3 days up to the test, but I'm not, again, recommending that. I'm just trying to show you that you need a lot more context for all these things. So we won't get into the figures there. You could do a clamp test if you were really interested in insulin resistance. You could request this. Nobody will do this because it's so clinically expensive and time consuming, unless you're an elite athlete. And what they do is they inject you with insulin, but straight into the veins, and your blood glucose will drop because insulin brings your blood glucose down. And if you need more insulin, that just shows that you are quite insulin resistant. And then they will then flow glucose into the veins to bring your blood glucose back up. And then they can do a look at how much insulin was needed to bring your blood glucose down, and then how much glucose was needed to push it back up. And if you need a lot more insulin and very little glucose, you're probably insulin resistant. Whereas if you have less insulin and more glucose, you're probably insulin sensitive, because they're putting lots of glucose in, but the insulin is actually working, keeping your blood glucose low. So they have to put more and more glucose in. That's called a clamp test. But here's a nice thing. Here's a really good thing. Talk about exercise. Whenever they do these tests in clinics for people that are trained compared to sedentary, the sedentary people always come out worse than the people that are trained in all the tests. So on my website, and you can also do this on other websites, not trying to get you to my website, you can request 2 blood tests, fasting blood glucose level and a fasting insulin level, and then you can just put it into a calculator and it will give you an estimate of your insulin resistance. Again, an estimate, HOMA-IR, that one's called, a homeostatic assessment of your insulin resistance. And it's only one blood draw, and you just have the 2 things taken from the blood, which is fasting blood glucose and fasting insulin levels. So people last week asked, how about the insulin resistance, how do you measure it? And that's the easiest one to do. You can take screenshots for all these sort of things. And how do you know if you're diabetic? And the hemoglobin A1C test looks at your red blood cells. You do a blood draw, and it's a calculation averaged over 90 days, how much glycation, how much sugar has stuck to your red blood cells. So that's one thing that people can test to see if they're diabetic or not, or pre-diabetic. It's quite a good test, but again, with carnivore, there does seem to be some proof that red blood cells last longer than 90 days. So you can find that your HbA1c starts reasonably looking good, like getting lower and lower and lower, but then as a longer term carnivore, you can see a little bump back up, but you need to know that that can happen. And then there's loads of questions about exercise, and I want to just quickly run through the benefits of exercise, and then I'll open it up to the questions we've had already, and then live questions as well. But I just want to quickly do this because What does insulin? What does exercise do? One of the things it does, it improves your mood. So you could be cleaning your teeth and dancing around because your mood has improved so much. Serotonin is released, endorphins, which is endogenous morphine. Those sort of things are released when you exercise. So it does seem to improve your mood. Does seem to give you, like I say, a feeling of relaxation. As I say, serotonin and melatonin and all these hormones that act on your body will be improved. Your sensitivity as well will be improved to those. So you feel more relaxed when you've finished your exercise, obviously not during it. Movement of the joints tends to improve the joint function. You will see that your synovial fluid, that's a fluid around all the joints, seems to improve when you are exercising. So you probably would feel less pain, and your agility and your fall, the likelihood of falling and causing fractures and stuff like that becomes less and less because your joints work better. Exercise can improve biomechanics and what a posh term called proprioception. So that's where you are in time and space. You know where your limbs are even when you can't see them, those sort of things. That happens with exercise. And again, that makes you more stable. Can be good socially. Talking about exercise online can be social. You can even find Facebook groups and Instagram groups and stuff like that, where you can find people that are doing the same sort of training as you, and you can get some nice social feedback, or you can see them face to face in the gym, which is really good. An excellent benefit of exercise is improving strength. Lots and lots of studies seem to have muscle mass, increased muscle mass seems to correlate with extra lifespan. So if you have more muscle, there is some reasons why muscle is also good to have. It means your resting metabolic rate can be a little bit higher, so you're burning more calories when you're resting. But strength is a pretty good thing to maintain, especially as you get older. And bone density, that can thicken. On this diet, as I've said before, we've seen people's bone density improve and their muscle mass improve without any exercise. And when I talk about exercise here, I'm talking about resistance training, strength training, lifting weights basically, or having some sort of resistance you're pushing against. That tends to improve bone density because the bones have to get thicker and stronger, same as the muscles have to get thicker and stronger if you're lifting weights. And most people who start exercising, believe it or not, even though they've been working out hard and getting breathless and raising their heart rate, they do seem to have more energy. So what didn't I mention? I didn't mention weight loss. And as a personal trainer, level 4 personal trainer in the UK, I don't recommend exercise for weight loss because there is a big reason for that. That's because the weight loss happens in the kitchen. It's no good doing really tons of exercise if your nutrition is not up to par, really. And nutrition is a real key. And people can lose fat and improve their body composition by just eating the right way. And like I say, I've had one example, which I use a lot, a 77-year-old woman categorically did not exercise, but went this way of eating, lost fat, gained muscle and gained bone density. So that's good. A little tip as well is not to overhydrate. The same as when we talk about eating. If you eat when you're hungry and stop when you're not hungry, the same with thirst. If you drink when you're thirsty and stop when you feel that your thirst has been quenched, that would be pretty handy. There's a fantastic book about this by Tim Noakes. Some of you might have heard of him, talking about hyponatremia, which is basically drowning in too much fluid. If you drink too much water, it actually can be counterproductive. There's a lot of science to that. So I'm going to use the first question as an example, then I'll whiz through the last bit of the presentation, then we'll get into live questions. But I wanted to teach you how to problem solve because I have some great questions. And Donna's such a brilliant contributor on Mighty Networks and in the Steak and Butter Gang. I thought she wouldn't mind me just going through the question and my answer and how I arrived at the answer. So Donna had a question about fasting glucose numbers. She's been doing well since August, so here's some context, and the number was around 70. But this week's numbers in the morning have been 98. Should I be worried about this? Now, I know Donna a little bit, and I know that she gave up sweeteners. So I've got a little bit more context than in that question. Okay, so here's my answer. Possibly you're now producing less insulin. So when she was having the sweeteners, that was still kicking up a little bit of insulin, I think, for her. And when she cut the sweeteners out, she couldn't believe how the cravings went. But the insulin was still there from the sweet taste, and the reaction for her, the cephalic reaction to the sweeteners was producing some insulin, and that was keeping the blood glucose down. Now what's happened is she's taken all the sweetness out of her diet, and therefore the blood glucose might be going up a little bit. This is nothing to be worried about. This is something we see a lot, that numbers go down, then they go back up, and it is in a reaction to your dietary intake. And I did an experiment with somebody who couldn't believe this. And I said, well, I tell you what, you could wake your pancreas back up, produce some more insulin, and eat a chocolate brownie. And that person ate a chocolate brownie and emailed me and said, I can't believe it, thinking it would spike my blood glucose. It actually plummeted. And so what seemed to have happened there was the pancreas was woken up and more insulin was produced. So I'm not recommending chocolate brownies, Donna, but that was just the thing. So yes, it's gone up. And I don't think it could be insulin resistance kicking back in, because that doesn't seem to happen. You could be the first person that I've ever experienced that happen to. But once your numbers start coming down, the only thing that changed was the dietary intake of sweet things. So you've completely taken those out of your diet. So maybe the numbers have gone up, but maybe another month and you'll be back in homeostasis and you'll see the number level out for a good level for you. Because there are some people that can really thrive with a small number, and some people can really thrive with slightly higher numbers. It is down to individuality. So when you're problem solving, you look at, well, what's happened and what's changed? That's the thing. And then trying to work out. So my numbers were low. That's good. Now they've gone up, which implies my insulin isn't at the right level. You know, you just have to think it through, really. And then you've got another question here. And again, because it's on the Mighty Networks, I'm sure we'll be all right to talk about this. Blood glucose levels of 50 to 60 during extended fasting. And it happens while somebody is asleep. And while you're asleep, your liver is producing your blood glucose for you. And it's very, very regulated by the body. So your body would think that that's possibly enough for you. There are some people that have 50 to 60, believe it or not, when they're awake and doing exercise. So these ranges, these normal ranges of blood glucose, and in fact, with all blood tests, they're what's called normative values, but you still need to look at how you're presenting. So I asked, firstly, if it's a continual glucose monitor, let's look at the calibration. And what you do is basically do an old-fashioned finger prick test and see if it matches up with the monitor that you've got on your arm. And then I also asked, were there any problems with fatigue or energy? But actually, no, no fatigue, and felt fine during the fast. So it's not a sort of area of worry. So that's it. So a couple of other questions came in. I want to go back to those, and then we'll finish the presentation with some more live questions. Which is better, a lighter weight with many reps in 3 sets, or heavier weights with less reps and go to failure? So by your 3rd set, you only do a few reps. Now, that's a brilliant question about training and exercise. Exercise is really good if you're diabetic or not diabetic, because you're improving your insulin sensitivity and your body's demands for glucose. You're giving that metabolic side of you a workout. You're working out glucose demand, you're working out your heart rate and your oxygen supply. Everything's getting a workout. But I have no goal for this, you see. Now, if you are thinking about getting stronger and more muscle, well, you would probably need heavier weights with less reps. And there's a thing about sets. And I'm not a fan of sets, to be honest, because I think to get a training response whenever you train. So if you're doing a bicep curl, you want your central nervous system to talk to your biceps and your joints and say, wow, this is really tough, this bicep curl. So we're needing to get you stronger and thicker. So you need to work to fatigue, really. So if you're doing 3 sets, there's going to be a long period where you're resting, where you'd probably be better to do 1 set to absolute failure and then move on to a different exercise, just absolutely fatigue the biceps in that particular example. I'm going to get into a little bit more of that later on, these questions. So, and then somebody has asked about HIIT. which is high intensity interval training, does it raise cortisol? And yes, it does. When you exercise, going back to what I just said about blood glucose, you are demanding more blood glucose, and it is the fight or flight response that does that. Your adrenal cortex kicks in and will raise cortisol. But all of these things like insulin, cortisol, all these hormones that we talk about aren't always bad. They're sometimes a good thing, and cortisol in this case is a good thing because it raises your blood glucose levels, gets your muscles fired up, gets your heart rate going, and that's all good things because you want blood going to your muscles, you want oxygen getting to your muscles, so you can work out as hard as possible for as long as possible. But when I say that, that doesn't mean hours in the gym. I'm saying if you're doing a bicep curl and you can do 12, that's as long as possible with that weight, and that might be too many reps. And if you have extra fat, and there's the other question about eating before or after your workout, do you need to do any of that? No, you keep your eating how you want to eat, and then your training will fit in with you. If you have extra fat on your body, it's silly to eat something before your workout because you want your workout to be fueled by the fat on your body. You want to be fat burning. So I'm not a big fan of pre or post workout meals, those sort of things, if you have excess fat. So I'm just going to finish that